Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and today we are back with more Hunting Glory. However, we are here to examine some parts of the series that may be a little less glorysome. And that's because Yoshihiro Togashi is an undeniably brilliant but sometimes problematic author due to his very improvised style. Because, for example, the anatomy of your standard Hunter x Hunter arc goes a little something like this. Togashi has fun idea for a setting. Togashi begins writing story around that fun setting. Togashi gets distracted by something shiny, and then Togashi immediately ends arc to begin a new one based on the shiny thing that he just saw. And weirdly enough, I don't mean that as a criticism. In fact, it's one of the things I love most about Hunter x Hunter. The fact that at any time events can cease and brand new unpredictable paths can emerge. It's very interesting because it actively spits in the face of purely planned stories, and it does so almost unbelievably successfully. However, when you do look at Hunter x Hunter as an overall body of work, Togashi's weekly spot at the Manga Improv Club does leave us with a couple of glaring inconsistencies. Problems that more than likely would not have arisen in a planned story, and while none of these, or at least most of these, are not series breaking, they do come kind of close, because there are some pretty bad ones in here. And our exploration is going to begin with a quick round of Accidental Assassin, a very simple minigame, the rules of which are as follows. You have walked into a room containing 3 Zoldyck family members, and it is going to be your job to guess which one of them has been contracted to assassinate you before they carry out the act. Should you guess incorrectly, then well, sorry. But as further afterlife punishment, you will need to subscribe to the New World Review, thus resulting in consistent injections of Hunter x Hunter culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. Meanwhile, if you are correct, then you will receive a 10% discount on all future Zoldyck services. So which Zoldyck will it be? Make your choice now and we shall reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1, and bam, it was Zeno. Never underestimate the elderly. So if you guessed incorrectly, then you know the thing to do, and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a recent inductee of our association. Welcome. Zeno leads quite nicely into one of the most gigantic, glaring inconsistencies of Hunter x Hunter, thus actually qualifying as a full-on plot hole. And rather sadly, this occurs during one of my favorite moments of the series, which is the commencement of the palace invasion, where Zeno invokes the dragon dive technique. Meanwhile, at the same time, the extermination team emerged to encounter Yuppie. However, we dwell on Killua for a bit because, and I quote, Killua, the only one who knew it was happening, froze because of it. The shock for the others being ignorant was much greater. And then Killua even states that this is his grandfather's dragon dive ability. So in the heat of the moment, yeah, this makes perfect sense. I mean, of course, Killua would know his family's techniques. However, the big problem here is that Killua had no concept of Nen prior to the Heaven's Arena arc, not even the basics. So it's hard to come up with a point in time where he would have actually seen this ability in action. So it is quite bizarre that he is able to recognize something so distinct. And look, it's not without potential explanation. This is one of the bigger debated plot holes within the Hunter x Hunter fandom, and I suppose it is possible that a very, very young Killua saw this ability being performed at some stage without actually being able to see it, you know, the aura dragon heads and stuff, or that Killua had been told that this was what his grandfather was capable of doing, and he just put 2 and 2 together during this whole invasion thing. But it's such a long-winded explanation when the simple and most likely correct answer is that, well, Togashi forgot. And funnily enough, having Killua notice Dragon Dive was probably a preemptive move to plug a potential plot hole of, well, how come Killua didn't know that his grandfather was there, So Togashi, being clever, turned into exactly what I suspect he was trying to prevent. And like I said in the intro, something like this is not series breaking, and if you do scrub your mind hard enough, then you can clean your way down to like a maybe explanation, but it's just one of those things that makes you go, that shouldn't have happened. As does a lot to do with the Phantom Troop, because their portrayal is, it's inconsistent. I often reference how odd it is that Crollo and the Kroll Bros can walk around so freely when they are pretty much public enemy number 1 all over the world. Because sometimes the troop will be treated like the secret shadow organization that everyone knows about but nobody has ever seen, whilst at other times the troop are treated like a band of celebrities who get recognized in an instant by absolute nobodies. And for the sake of argument, let's say that the Phantom Troop were all completely unknown prior to York New City. There are arguments that might say otherwise, but it doesn't matter because during and after York New City, the large majority of the troop were revealed in one way or another, whether it be via the fake corpses left by Cortopi's ability or the actual photos that were spread of the troop. But despite that, the story continues to treat the troop depending entirely on the needs of the story itself. For example, Crollo not only went on to become a floor master of Heaven's Arena, but he actively fought Hisoka in a very, very public televised match. And this was well after Crollo's name and face had been discovered, so it does boggle the mind ever so slightly that he can participate in such a public spectacle without any kind of authorities becoming involved in attempting to do something like, I don't know, know, capture the world's most wanted criminal, something like that. But then you also have situations like on the Black Whale 1, where Nobunaga, Finks, and Feitan were recognized on sight by Luini, who is for all intents and purposes a cucking scrub nobody. But then you can also do stuff like take a step back to Greed Island, where Bisky doesn't even recognize the name, much less the face of Crawler. So it's hard to pin down. On one hand, Togashi plays them as this niche industry legend, but on the other, they're also a group of world-renowned terrorists. It's the same sort of dynamic that you have with the Zoldyck family, being world-famous assassins, but also needing to maintain a stealthy nature for their jobs, and thus nobody ever recognizes them in public unless they do. And that's kind of the general thing about all established rules and lore of Hunter x Hunter. We follow them until we don't, and then we start following them again when we need to. Everything is completely malleable depending on what Togashi wants to happen. However, that sort of thing, once again, not series breaking, but the extent of knowledge regarding the troop and how they conduct themselves in the world is, like many other things in the series, simply inconsistent. As is the knowledge of Nen in general. Nen is probably the biggest inconsistency overall in Hunter x Hunter, not in terms of the system itself. It's actually quite absurdly brilliantly thought out. However, it was pretty blatantly inserted into a series that was not originally intended to house it. That's why you have all of these Hunter exam arc inconsistencies like Killua's non-Nen abilities, you know, stuff like turning his hands into a claw and the whole rhythm echo technique. Stuff that was meant to give the world a magical, supernatural feel, but then ended up being retconned into Nen stuff, but it also doesn't fit into Nen stuff. So let's just say it and not kid ourselves. Nen did not exist when Togashi began writing the series. And because Togashi also doesn't give the most attention to world building, it's a tricky concept to understand because it's meant to be this incredibly well-kept secret. Something that the Hunter Association has an entire exam based around deciding who and who is not worthy of learning the secret. But at the same time, the Hunter Association has no control whatsoever over this Nen secret because everyone knows about Nen, unless they're not supposed to. Once again, we refer to the rules of Hunter x Hunter. It's a rule until it isn't, and then it isn't until it is again. Like take Genthru for example. He is not a hunter, and yet he possesses advanced in-depth knowledge about Nen, specifically the framework taught by the Shingen-ryu school of Kung Fu. The same can be said for the Phantom Troop, who must have become Nen users in isolation, and yet they practice Nen with the exact same terminology as someone who was formerly taught. But even common groups understand Nen. We have random residents of Meteor City that can use it. It was very common amongst the mafia families of the Ten Dons. Many of the Kakin Empire bodyguards are Nen users, as well as their extended mafia families, and there was even that one random soldier in East Gorto who was somehow an experienced aura wielder, and not to mention all of the Heaven's Arena combatants on the 200th floor and beyond who publicly showcase their Nen abilities on a regular basis. And sure, they might be invisible to the world watching them, but the effects of their abilities are not. Has no one ever become curious as to exactly how these superhuman fighters pull off what would seem to be clear sorcery? Stuff like Castro making a full-on Nen body double, that wasn't even invisible because that ability was conjured. So from the perspective of everyone watching, that's just hard magic. Nen is on full and easily accessible display in the world, and it also seems to be quite simply studied and acquired by those who have no ties to the Hunter Association. So my question is, how is Nen still a secret? How does someone like 4th Prince Saradnik, who has every possible resource at his disposal, not come across this shockingly common art form, or any ultra-wealthy individual really? But once again, that's just Hunter x Hunter. Nen is a secret until it isn't, but then it goes back to being a secret again when it needs to be. To turn to another potential plot hole now, in chapter 344, we receive a recap of how Kurapika has acquired all of his Scarlet Eyes thus far. It's a profoundly interesting inner monologue because it paints Kurapika as a very changed man who has done some seriously shady and deep dark stuff to take back these eyes. And one source of these eyes is identified as a daughter of the Mafia, a clear reference to Neon Lestrade, who we remember wanted nothing more than a pretty pair of Scarlet Eyes to add to her collection of pretty things. Now the problem here is that Neon never actually got those eyes. Kurapika won them at auction and delivered them, but they were actually the fabricated pair of eyes crafted by Kotopi's gallery fake ability. And the last that we seemingly hear of these eyes is that they were quote stolen, which we all know means that they just disappeared because that's how Kotopi's ability works. But Kurapika in chapter 344 categorically states that the only remaining eyes in the world are those in possession of Saradnik. So this is another instance where Togashi forgot his own convoluted narrative and just went, oh yeah, well Kurapika took the eyes from Neon eventually, didn't he? That's probably what happened. Except that Neon didn't have the eyes for him to take. Unless we want to embark on a truly tangled journey and say that the Phantom Troop did put the real eyes on the black market and Neon won them again. However, this wouldn't actually be possible because after Crollo stole Neon's Nen ability, her father Light Lestrade lost his source of income, which was selling her fortune-tellingness, so he would not have been able to purchase the eyes for his daughter. Of course, Kurapika Asuka took over the Nostrad family, and I suppose you could argue that he used their funds to buy the eyes regardless, if they somehow had the funds, that is. But then in that case, the statement about gaining them through Neon becomes false. So it's just easier to slice this whole argument cake up with a nice Occam's razor and say that Togashi clearly forgot about the eyes, plain and simple. As such, we will now turn to Ikalgo and the burning issue of names. Now, many people forget this, including myself sometimes, but our lion aunt Leol actually had an original name which was Hagia, and he changed his name to Leol to better reflect the individual that he was becoming, having more pride in his lionness. But this actually formed a pretty major dramatic crux for the Ikalgo character, because he accidentally referred to Leol as Hagia during the palace invasion whilst controlling Flutter's body, which of course caused Brovida to become highly suspicious of this Flutter, because he of all people should have known to call him Leol. But the thing we kind of miss at this point is that also of all people who should have known to call him Leol would have been Ikalgo, because Ikalgo was actually a captain in a group that was literally called the Leol Squad, and he was even working with the squad to hunt down Killua, and this was after Leol had changed his name. So from any kind of reasonable standpoint, Ikalgo should have known that Hagia was now called Leol, particularly as Ikalgo was a member of, once again, the Leol Squad. To get around this, we would need to perform some sort of Olympic level mental gymnastics to force what actually happened in the story. What we would need to do is insist that Ikalgo, despite being a direct subordinate of Flutter, had no contact with the Leol Squad. But I mean, if that premise already doesn't work, because Flutter was in close contact with Ikalgo via telepathy during this whole Killua event. But the weirder thing is that, for whatever reason, neither Flutter nor Leol nor anyone informed Ikalgo of the name change, which seems really odd considering how much Leol hated being referred to by his previous name. It just makes no sense. Ikalgo should have known. The only way that I'd accept his ignorance is if he was a member of a different squad that happened to stumble upon Killua at the same time as Leol's group. But he wasn't. He was a member of, once again, the Leol Squad. And so this whole name business, whilst being an incredibly tense and wonderful moment during the palace invasion, logically, it never should have been a thing. Unless they'd all gotten together and decided to just troll Ikalgo for fun, which I wouldn't put beyond someone like Leol. He's a sneaky, funny lion dude. But in the end, it just results in him getting trolled when the name Hagia eventually comes up again and he gets all lion angry. But this is just a taste of the many Hunter inconsistencies. This whole series is like a beautiful mess of a puzzle that doesn't quite fit together properly, but it looks amazing regardless. And to explore this puzzle some more, here's another fun video for you. There's always more to learn, explore, and experience about this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there.